This is Point of Inquiry for Thursday, October 31st, 2013.
Welcome to the inaugural episode of the newly revamped Point of Inquiry podcast, which we're broadcasting live from the Center for Inquiry's annual summit in sunny Tacoma, Washington.
I'm skeptical about that.
Our first guest, it's an honor to have Leonard Mlodinow here. Was that okay? Did I mangle that too much? Mlodinow?
Perfect.
Mlodinow? Thank you.
Keep saying it.
He's a physicist, he's an author, and a screenwriter, best known for co-authoring with Stephen Hawking the New York Times #1 bestseller, The Grand Design, and the international bestseller, A Briefer History of Time. His other books include The Drunkard's Walk, How Randomness Rules Our Lives, a New York Times Notable Book of the Year, and the new book is Subliminal, How Your Unconscious Mind Rules Your Behavior, for which he won the 2013 Penn E.O. Wilson Literary Science Writing Award. You may notice that I am neither DJ Grothy nor Chris Mooney. My name's Josh Zepps. I'm a founding host and producer of HuffPost Live, which is the Huffington Post's new online streaming talk thingamabob. I asked Ron before this how long we should go for here with Leonard, and he said it really depends on how good I am. That if I'm as good as Chris and DJ, then, you know, I can feel free to go for quite a long time. And if I'm not, then we should really keep it short. So, Leonard, thanks for your time. That concludes this episode of Point of Inquiry. Subliminal, the book. It's basically about how there are behaviors that we recognize as being unconscious, that when I drive on a route that I know very well, I recognize that I'm not thinking through all of those steps. But you say that it goes a lot further than that in fact, things that we think are conscious, things that we're convinced are conscious, freely made choices, are in fact governed by our subconscious.
Right. In your brain, there are different structures that some of which you are aware of their operation and some of which you're not. And they're, of course, very highly interconnected. And every time you experience something, every time you perceive something, every time your mind takes in data, your unconscious brain is processing that, and it's feeding the results of the processing to your conscious mind, but you're not aware of that processing or that the results are coming. It's just it's a conclusion that your conscious mind seems to reach without you being aware of how you got there.
Now, a lot of people would have a kind of basic assumption that, my instincts are going to be right. My gut is probably going to know things that my brain, my rational mind, can't deduce. Your conclusion is kind of the reverse.
Well, yeah, and there was a famous book written on that a few years ago.
What book are you referring?
Well, in just a blink, I could tell you.
Oh, I see. Okay, good old Malcolm.
And, you know, sometimes your hunches are correct. I'm not saying at all that your instincts and that your unconscious mind gives you wrong answers, because your conscious mind is there for a very good reason. You couldn't survive without it. It helps you process all the data that helps you get along in the real world, to perceive your vision, your hearing, your surroundings, to know how to react when things happen to you, and so that you don't have to stop all the time and say, stop the action and think about things, right? But because we evolved in the wild, and we are now living in, quote, civilization, there are times where your unconscious mind leads you astray. So I would say that, as opposed to an author like Gladwell who takes one position, I'd say that there are times where your unconscious mind helps you and gives you the right answer, and there are times when it gives you the wrong answer. And what's important is to realize how it works so you can try and tell the difference.
How does it work? Well, you've written a whole book on it, so in 25 words or less.
I love your being very direct, and I think there's a sign that this interview will go a long time. Your mind takes in data in various ways, through your hearing, through your vision, and also more complex data about people, about financial decisions. And your unconscious mind has the job of taking all that complex data and processing it in a way and digesting it in a sense to give your conscious mind a clear picture of what's going on. So it does various things to the data that comes in. It fills in gaps. It draws conclusion. It makes its own calculations. And it's the role, how it works is to take the limited data that comes in and to process it and to offer your conscious mind some simpler conclusions that you can chew on, and your conscious mind, which is willful and which you're aware of, takes in these feelings and this input from your unconscious mind and makes a conscious decision. So there's an interplay between the two, but most of the thinking in your brain comes from the unconscious.
We all, I think, recognize that other people are biased and confused and influenced by their own presuppositions and expectations and experience and past experiences. We tend not to recognize it in ourselves. Is that part of the problem?
Well, if we don't know ourselves and we're not aware of how we come to our decisions, our feelings, our conclusions, then that's suboptimal, I would say, yes.
I come to mind completely consciously with absolutely no bias.
Right?
Yes, I'm 100% objective at all times.
Yeah, you're like classical economic theory. That works really well.
So how do you do better? In the process of writing this book, have you thought to yourself, well, here are some ways, some rules of thumb that I should deploy more in my everyday life?
Well, it's difficult. I wrote the book to raise your consciousness on the unconscious so that you are aware that subliminal influences are coming to you through your environment and that they're affecting you. But there's really no way to tap into the unconscious because it is outside your awareness because of the structure of the brain. But what you can do is learn about it and learn about yourself and how you behave and try to use that to make conscious decisions. For example, something very simple. I talk in the book about a study that was done in England in a grocery store where they sell wine, and they sell French and German wine on the wine aisle, and the researchers convinced the people there to play on alternate days, to play German music and French music. And if you ask people, and they certainly did ask the shoppers afterwards, is your choice about what wine to buy influenced by the music playing in the background? People will say no. I use the data on the wine. I know I like this grape or this type of wine, or I want to pay this price, or I'm having such and such for dinner, so that dictates the wine. But actually, when they studied the data on who bought what they found was that on the days that the French music was playing, 2/3 of the wine bought was French, and on the days that the German music was playing, 2/3 of the wine bought was German. So these people were making an unconscious decision to buy their wine. At least a number of them seem to have been without they didn't know that they were doing it. It was something coming in from their environment. However, if you're conscious of of the way your unconscious mind works, and you actually notice the music, you could stop and say to yourself, "Wait a minute, is it really my taste in wine that's making me buy this German wine, or is it the music?
Is it this strange Bavarian Oompa Loompa band that is playing in the background?" What about confirmation bias as a trick that our minds play on us? In other words, our tendency to cherry pick evidence that supports our pre-existing beliefs and ignore other evidence. I think this sort of plays into people's sense of superstition as well, maybe even spirituality and religiosity. You know, I prayed about my mother and then she called me. It's miraculous. It must be telepathy. You just forget the fact that she didn't call you the past 10 times you prayed.
Yeah, well, there's two factors there. One is the confirmation bias is the idea that when people have a theory about the world and they look around at their environment to test that theory, they tend to look for confirming factors rather than trying to poke holes in their theory. So we all have a natural tendency, if we believe something, to try and confirm it rather than to try and poke holes, which is really much more efficient.
We like poking holes at other people's theories.
Yeah. Well, for instance, let me give you an example. Let me see if I can think of the famous example is I'm going to give you a sequence of 3 numbers, and I want you to think about what will be the next. I want you to have a theory as to how I'm generating this sequence, okay? So what kind of numbers I'm talking about. So let's see. It's 2, 8, and 10. Okay? Now you can all think about it, and you all have a theory about how I got those numbers, let's say, okay? And now I want you to test your theory, and you can ask me, pick a number, and ask me, does this number fit? Now, most people, I said, 2, 8, and 10. Most people will have the theory that these are even numbers, and they'll throw out 12. And I'll go, yeah. And then they'll say, okay, that one would have worked. Give me another one that would have worked. They'll say 20. And I'll go, yeah, that would have worked too. And eventually they confirm that they're even numbers. But actually the rule that I generated this sequence by was simply increasing numbers. So my rule was numbers that are getting larger. You happen to pick ones that were getting larger, but you were testing your theory that it's even. But if you have a theory that the numbers are even and you want to test it, what you should have proposed was an odd number to see if that works or doesn't work. You should have tried to poke a hole in your theory. And if you would, I said 2, 8, and 10. And if you would have said, what about 13? I would have also said yes, and you would have realized your theory was wrong. So that's called confirmation bias. Now, motivated reasoning is the other thing that you said, which is that when we approach the world and we look at we try and make sense of what's going on, we tend to not look at the data and then draw a conclusion, but we tend to have a conclusion that we already know we want to reach and try to find data that supports it. So that's what we call thinking as a lawyer as opposed to thinking as a scientist. And that's, when I say that we tend to do that, I don't mean on a conscious level. It's not that we sit down and say, let's say I believe in the death penalty. And I'm going to sit down and look at all the literature and try and find studies that support that belief. No, you think you're objective and you go, I'm going to look at all the studies. But when you come upon a study that supports it, you go, what a beautiful study. What wonderful methodology. Look at the crisp data. And when you find a study that goes against it, you go, look at that crap. Look at what kind of method is that? They've actually done studies on the death penalty where they have fakes. They create fake scientific articles, and they divide people into different groups. Some are for the death penalty, or some are against it. And they give these people scientific articles, these quote scientific articles to look at. And the articles are actually they come in pairs where they take the same methodology and the same kind of data, but they make it support the death penalty in one version and be against it in the other. And then they hand these out to all these people kind of randomly. And what they find is that the people, you would think that if people didn't have this motivated reasoning, if they were objective, that you'd get maybe 70% think this methodology is good and 30% think that methodology is good. And it would be across the board, whether you support the death penalty or you're against it. But that's not at all what they find. What they find is that the people who support the death penalty like this methodology when they read the paper where that methodology was used to support it, and they don't like the other one when it was used to debunk it. And it's exactly the opposite amongst the other people. Mm-hmm. So this illustrates the fact that when we take in the data, we're really acting like lawyers. So that's called motivated reasoning.
So how do we ever change our minds then? I mean, one of my favorite books of yours is the one you wrote with Deepak Chopra, The War of the Worldviews, where each of you come at spirituality and religion from a different perspective. You as a physicist, him as whatever he is, a spiritualist, I suppose. I didn't mean that to sound quite as condescending.
A spiritualist is someone who sits with it at a table and watches it move or something. That's, I don't know.
A religious thinker, quasi-religious thinker. But what you're really trying to do is sort of sway one another towards your own take on what the nature of the cosmos is. It's very, very difficult to do. I mean, people are not. We're here, obviously, under the enterprise at a summit like this, in trying to spread our ideals and our beliefs about what the world is like and what the universe is like and how we should live. Do we have any hope? What are we all doing here, in other words, if what you say is true and people are obstinate and won't have their minds changed?
Well, okay, let me say a couple things. First of all, that process that I'm talking about is an unconscious process, so people are sincerely believe that they are looking at the data objectively, and they're sincerely believing the results of their unconscious mind when it pokes holes in the data and it leads them toward the conclusion that they want. But that doesn't mean that you can't change your mind, because this is an effect, this is a tendency, this is the kind of thing, the way we think. But at times, or if the data is strong enough, people can change their mind. So I'm not saying that you can never change your mind, but it's much more difficult than it would be if people were objective.
I guess, and what about scenarios where there is no data? I mean, religious belief strikes me as one of those. It's not like you're going to reason someone out of a position that they didn't reason themselves into in the first place.
Right. There's a lot of motivated reasoning going on in religion where people feel intuitively or because psychologically want to believe in a religion, or they were brought up that way, and then they perceive evidence in the world to support that belief.
I want to read something that Deepak writes in that book, and I want to get your take on it.
In War of the Worldviews.
In War of the Worldviews.
Okay. Well, if you want to get my take on it, it was probably in that book. I'll try to recall what my take on it was.
He writes, although the eye beholds rocks, mountains, trees, and the sky, this is only a veil drawn over a vast, mysterious, unseen reality. Beyond the reach of the five senses lies an invisible realm of infinite possibility, and the key to unfolding its potential is consciousness. Go within, the sages and seers declared, and you will find the true source of everything, your own awareness. Spirituality has been around for many thousands of years, and its researchers were brilliant, the very Einsteins of consciousness. anyone can reproduce and verify their results as with the principles of science. So religious thinkers are being depicted as researchers. Spiritualists are Einsteins. Their claims can be reproduced and verified. Does it bother you as a physicist, as a scientist, when scientific language gets used in that way?
Well, it does bother me when scientific language is misused. I don't think the word researcher is a scientific term that I think that what he's doing in this case is mischaracterizing certain individuals that he's talking about, and does that bother me? I don't know. I mean, the book was a debate where he states his points and then I state mine, and I would tend, when I came to a passage like that, to just say, and I don't remember exactly what you said, but that to call someone an Einstein of consciousness doesn't make, for instance, what they say correct. It's just a very easy name to give it, right? To call some of the seers and sages he talks about researchers is, again, just an easy term that you can put on, but has no content. So it doesn't really have any meaning. It's just a pretty term. So it doesn't really bother me, but I feel that in a conversation we ought to talk about clarifying, what we mean and seeing if there's anything behind it.
Well, also, I mean, the scientific terms about reproducing results and verifying results mean different things in the physical world than if what you're talking about is that if I meditate, then I'm going to feel a oneness with the cosmos.
One of the things he said in the book that I objected to was he called Jesus a scientist. And I said, well, I don't know. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. I'm not aware that Jesus went around, let himself, get slapped by 200 people. For 100 he turned the other cheek, and for the other 100 he hit them back, and then he judged to see which worked better. I'm not aware that he did that. So is he a scientist or not? I question that characterization.
You were talking just earlier about falsifying results rather than trying to verify results with the 2, 8, 10 number thing. How important is that to science, to understand that methodologically that it's more important to try to falsify a theory than it is to verify it?
Well, it's not at all important to science. Science is a subject that will progress and it fortunately has a certain methodology that will carry it forward. But it's important to a scientist, because if you want to be successful, then you're going to spend less time on theories that don't work and more time on correct theories. And the way to ensure or raise the probability that the theories you're working on have some truth to them is to try and poke holes in them, not to try and look to see how great they are. And of course, everyone who comes up with a theory always loves their theory, whatever their idea is. That's just human nature. But if you want to be a professional scientist and move forward in your career, you will identify the wrong stuff you say as quickly as possible and move on. And as a theoretical physicist, I know that most of what you say and think is wrong. So it's good to get efficient at weeding it out.
What do you make of the extent to which people swallow theories that they don't do that towards? I'm thinking of people who don't believe in vaccines because they think there's an autism link, people who might go to homeopaths, that kind of slightly irrational sphere of activity where there's not really any number of false positives that would dissuade them.
Right. So these people are not scientists. They're people in general public. And when they're doing very harmful things like not letting their kids get vaccines, it really annoys me, and I think the government ought to step in. But in general, I don't really care.
Mandatory vaccinations?
Well, that's a hard. See, I don't know if I would do something. That's all. I feel so impotent. But it generally doesn't annoy me when people are simply ignorant. And there's a lot of ignorant people out there, and you will go through life being unhappy if you get annoyed every time you run into one. But on the other hand, when someone doesn't get their child medical care because they have these strange beliefs, or when when let's say a flu vaccine gets a bad reputation based on totally false information, then that annoys me because it hurts people and it hurts society.
Do you think the media has a role to play here? I mean, when you say do something, the first thing that I think is, well, change the media so that the media doesn't think that good journalism means giving two sides to every opinion, regardless of whether or not one is true and the other one is BS.
Right. So I guess I maybe would vote for you as being the model of the great journalists, but it's not a model that I see very often. I think that the media gets very low grade in that.
Yeah, definitely. How much of your book, The Drunkard's Walk, about randomness, I wonder how much you think that religious belief is partly a consequence of misunderstanding randomness and probability. I'm thinking of probably the most popular reason why people believe in God, which is the teleological argument, the argument that everything is just so finely tuned and so perfect. Why are we all here? How are the laws of physics so finely tweaked to make existence possible? Why are the laws of evolution the way that they are? It must have some grand designer. You get into this a little bit with Deepak. What's your take on that argument?
Well, that's a very interesting issue that you bring up. And you brought up two common examples. Well, the evolution is a common example. The fine-tuning of physics is something that Stephen Hawking and I wrote about that I think before we wrote about it wasn't talked about that much. But the answers are very different. We understand evolution pretty well, and no one very few scientists, people who really study the details of evolution and take it seriously, believe that there's any fine-tuning going on that needs a creator, that needs any kind of adjustment, or guidance. There are a lot of phony arguments about how that's necessary, and there are people who track down the phony arguments and refute them. And I think after, I don't know, 5, 10, 100 of those things, you should just shut up, go home, and let people think what they want. But can I address the other issue that Stephen and I wrote about is a much more serious intellectual issue, because nobody knows why the laws of physics are so finely tuned to allow the universe to exist. Now, in that book, The Grand Design, we proposed one argument, but we also explained that this is a speculation and it's belief in where theories are going. But there is... What is
that argument? Can you explain it?
Well, I can, but it'll take a while. That's why we wrote a whole book about it. But there are many theories of modern physics and modern cosmology that predict multiple universes, and it's possible that the universes can have different laws. And there's a whole spectrum of laws, therefore. And, of course, people will exist in the universes that have the laws that allow people to exist, which sounds tautological, but it explains why we would, obviously, if we are people and we exist, we would find that the laws are the laws that allow us to exist, and so there's no mystery. However, that's very speculative, and it'll be a long time before physicists really know how seriously to take the multiverse arguments. So if you don't take those arguments, the fact remains that if you tweak almost any part of modern of what we know as the laws of physics today by just a small amount, in some cases change, to say, the mass of the electron by 0.5%, or the strength of the weak force by 2%, things like that. People have done. We have a pretty good theory of how those forces work. And we have a pretty good idea of how the universe evolved. And people have done computer models to see what would happen with it's a long story, but would galaxies have evolved? Would stars have evolved? Could there be planets, etc.? Could there be matter as we know it? And with almost any of these little tweaks, there's so many of them, the answer is no. So the laws of physics are very finely tuned in a way to allow human beings or living beings such as us to exist. And to be fair and honest and objective, I would say that's probably the best argument I know for God, because we haven't shown that that's not true, and it is certainly a huge mystery. We don't know why it is. So I think you have to, be fair and say, yeah, that's an argument. And had Deepak made that argument in our book, I would have embraced that argument, and I would have said, well, it doesn't mean I'm saying that we've proved there's God. Just because there's a mystery that needs to be explained doesn't mean you have to call up the God word and explain it. But if you decide to do that, that's a less of a I think choice that one can criticize than when you're justifying God through a phony argument about evolution.
Mm-hmm. And on that phony argument about evolution, people will often make the analogy of if you were walking along a beach and you found a watch, you wouldn't just assume that it had been thrown together. It would have to have a watchmaker, or there's the analogy of a 747 or something. These things require an explanation, and humans are so complex that they require an explanation. Just speak to us about that misunderstanding of what natural selection is, what randomness is, and perhaps mention that Richard Dawkins thing about him writing the computer program that would create, that would mimic evolution.
Well, see, the people who use that watchmaker argument that don't understand how evolution works, because in evolution, the organisms are not simply do not simply appear and are designed by they don't just appear, but they change from one to another. So you start from a simpler organism, and then all kinds of changes occur, and there's a selection process by nature itself whereby things die out, and then other organisms occur, and so forth. It's evolution, right? And very complex things can be formed by evolution, and people who make the arguments that a watch couldn't just appear don't address the fact at all that watches, being inanimate objects, don't go through a process of evolution. But if watches were animate objects and had to compete for their being wound up or for their batteries, or and had there been little watch components floating around in a bath of primordial fluid, then I think watches would have evolved, and you would find them there. So the people who make those arguments just don't understand it. Now, what the Dawkins program was, he was addressing, I believe, people who say that they talk about the monkeys could type Shakespeare, yeah. And of course, you wouldn't get Shakespeare in the age of the universe if the monkeys were simply typing. And again, that's a misunderstanding of evolution, because evolution has natural selection and it has genetic changes that occur gradually that are selected.
It's precisely that it's non-random.
It's precisely that it's not exactly that the wrong ones don't survive and go on to branch out millions of other wrong ones, but there's a selection going on. So all those arguments have to do with the fact that there's natural selection.
And the Dawkins program, the computer program, just explain that, because I think it's a cute... I
don't know if I remember the details, but go ahead.
Well, I think it was basically that
he put in natural selection.
Yeah, he created a computer program that mimics natural selection.
Right.
And it only took maybe 43 tries or something to come up with the Shakespearean line that he had been hoping it would come up with.
Right.
Rather than the age of the universe. And 43 tries versus the age of the universe is pretty good.
It's pretty good, yeah.
Well, did you lose your faith at any time? Did you ever have it?
Faith in what?
A creator God.
Well, I don't usually talk about my personal, religious beliefs.
Welcome to Point of Inquiry.
I'm sorry?
Welcome to Point of Inquiry.
Yeah. I've been grilled on it before on CNN. I would say that I haven't lost. I don't think they've evolved very much. I think that the what I believe about the nature of God and the need for a creator is pretty much the same that it was when I was in high school, and it's most similar to what Einstein believed. And people quote Einstein a lot. Trying to he always invoked the name God, but he didn't really mean the God of the Bible. And it's just as a physicist, as you see tremendous regularities and miracles in nature, not just the fine tuning, but just the fact that you write down a few dumb equations and then you build $1 billion accelerator and do some crazy electronic measurements and it all matches up. It seems a bit beyond the imagination. And so I think that there's a feeling that, there's something out there very vague, and, it's not really relevant for everyday human life. It's something maybe if you're a philosopher you think about, but that I don't actually think about too often.
Good answer. What are you an optimist about our fate? How do you think things are unfolding?
Oh, I have no question at all that the fate of human race has become extinct. And
how long have we got?
The only question is how and how long, and that's a more difficult question. So you can start with the far future when the sun will turn into a red giant and swallow up the earth. Probably won't survive that. But if you go even sooner, for instance, there's these things called mantle plumes that I think every 750,000 years blow up roughly the entire western half of the United States. That's not all of humanity, but those people certainly won't enjoy it. And it'll make a lot of clouds that will damage, I think, most of the Earth, and who knows if humans will survive that. And
that'll be the point at which I move back to Australia, I think.
Yeah, and I forgot how many. What did I say? I forgot how many years exactly it is. But the point is that we're just due for it now. But since it's so many years that the uncertainty in our measurements could be 1 million or 100,000 years off, and I don't remember the exact numbers now, but that could kill us. There's people who speculate about asteroids. There's a history of asteroids colliding with the Earth, and I know that there are some schemes now to try to deflect them, but that could get us too. And then there's all the more mundane things, global warming. Probably, I don't think it'll really kill us. I don't think the Earth minds global warming. It's not going to be a big problem for the Earth, and it will certainly cause a reshuffling of species, and I think it cause a lot of pain amongst humans. I don't think it'll make humans extinct. It'll cause them to want to move, from place to place, which isn't always so easy. It'll cause food shortages because the places that we grow food won't be capable of growing food anymore, et cetera, et cetera. But, on the big scheme of things, the cockroaches won't mind at all, and they'll eat our bodies, and that'll be that. But we'll probably survive global warming.
This is such an optimistic vision of the future. The cockroaches will eat our bodies. It's going to be fine, Josh.
Well, you know what? Some things end up eating your body anyway, unless you're cremated. So just learn to live with it.
The ever sunny Leonard Mlodinow, thank you so much for being on Point of Inquiry.
Thank you.